Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Digital Transformation After the Pandemic. I'm Paul Michelman, Editor-in-Chief of MIT Sloan Management Review, and I'll be your moderator today. Today's program is sponsored by Compunal Digital. Our speaker today is George Westerman. George is a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management and principal research scientist for workforce learning in MIT's Abdul Latif Jameel World Education Lab. George, welcome, and over to you.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks all of you for being here for this webinar. It's been just a fascinating and scary and horrible time for many of us. And all of us, as we've been adjusting to the COVID world, we've had a lot of uncertainty. We've also seen a lot of really interesting things go on. And from a research standpoint, it's also been very interesting to see many things happen so much faster than they have before, but also to try to figure out what can we all do to help the terrible things that are going on right now in the pandemic. And so I want to, send out certainly, my thoughts and my prayers for India and Brazil and many other places where this is still it's just still a terrible problem. And we just hope that everybody can get through this okay. As we think about it, though, one of the things we need to think about as business leaders is what does that mean for what we're going to be doing as we start to come out of this challenge, as we move to the after pandemic or that middle world where some people are back and some are not. How can we think about digital transformation there? Instead of just adapting and being able to work remotely, how can we think about coming back better and being what we should be as the world starts returning to some level of normalcy? So our digital transformation research started in 2010, and we've done many, many interesting things in the research then. We really started this before digital transformation was really a term. And now, of course, it's very popular. There's a lot of really good stuff going on. And so what we want to do is think back to what we had done and what does that mean for moving forward. So what we know, and this has been true and it continues to be true, that technology is the endless agitator of the business world. That no matter what happens, we think we've mastered the technology and something new comes along. So for example, remember when the Google car there, that's what it used to look like. And now, of course, we've got Teslas nearly driving themselves and other cars doing much more. And each of these, I have to check this slide whenever I use it because I got to make sure these people are still in business. The key point is it keeps moving. And we all know Moore's Law. Moore's Law says technology doubles in power about every 18 to 24 months. And that is a challenge to keep up with when we're in a business, especially if you entered business about the time that I did, when 5-year plans were a thing. If Moore's Law says that every 18 months things double, that means every 5 years technology is 10 times as good as it was before. Every 10 years is 100 times as good as it was before. That means that our 5-year plans are 10 times out of date the minute they start. And so we need to have a different way of working. And certainly our digital transformation work has helped with that. To think through that, and other people have really great advice also on how do you think in this more rapid, more emergent way while still moving in the direction you need to move. But in Moore's Law, and there's always debate about Moore's Law ever since it first happened, where Moore's Law was ending, but then it keeps on going. If that's Moore's Law, I want to give you George's Law, Westerman's Law, and we call it the first law of digital innovation. And that's the technology changes quickly, but organizations change much more slowly. And that is a fact of nature. It's something that most of us know, but we often forget. And what that means is that when we're thinking about all these technology changes, we got to remember that the only way technologies provide value to companies is if you change the way your company works to make that happen. I was privileged to be able to join many of the meetings for our Work of the Future initiative at MIT. And when that first started, there was a lot of discussion going on about robots eating jobs and what jobs would be left in 5 years. And what we learned in that research is that, just because robots are there doesn't mean that manufacturers are going to adopt them right away. And it's a slower process than we thought. On the other hand, there are jobs going away. The routine jobs are going away faster than we thought. And it also is doing some terrible things to the economic disparities we already have in the world. It is also changing that. So while it's happening slower, it is happening, and we need to do something about that. But what we need to remember is, unless organizations change, the technology does nothing for business. So what that means is when we think about digital transformation, it's really less of a digital problem than it is a transformation problem, less of a technology problem than it is a leadership problem to be able to envision and drive this change over and over again in companies. Now, that's digital technology. That's happening fast. It's continually changing. And then along comes the coronavirus, right? We're now, 14, 15 months into this challenge that we've all been through, and it just accelerated everything even faster. Satya Nadella said, in 2 months we did, years worth of change because we all had to make things happen faster. In fact, here's the joke that has been going around for a little while. Who led digital transformation in your company? And it's not the CEO, it's not the CTO, it's really COVID. But what I would argue there is that COVID didn't lead the transformation. We led the transformation. COVID made us change faster than we wanted to do. And while that was a very bad thing, it also was an impetus, and I think it taught us something, which is that when we want to move quickly, we can move quickly. We just have to want it and need it enough. Or maybe we need to think differently about what it is we're doing, what's really impossible. Because things became possible that were not, things that we thought were impossible became possible. All of us working from home, us doing all our teaching online, or at Sloan, we actually do a combination of you can be online or in person, but we're going to make that classroom, we're going to knit that together. 2 classrooms and virtual, professor either place, the students either place, but we're going to make that a unified experience. Not something we would have even tried or even thought was possible before. Remote doctor visits, all these different things. In fact, over the last year, one thing we learned is that we were able to do the impossible in many, many ways. And like I said, although it's been a terrible reason to have to do it, it has revealed capabilities that we didn't know were there. And it's also made us rethink in many ways what is impossible. So that also caused me to rethink some work we had done a little while back on what were the assumptions that drive our thinking. How do we decide what's possible and what's not? How do we decide what's worth going after and what just is going to be too hard? And certainly in the digital world, we've been thinking about some of these things. And in the COVID world has introduced some more assumptions that needed rethinking. And the way I want to think about these things is not that these assumptions are wrong, but they're not universally right anymore. And in many organizations, the idea we want to do is take a look at these assumptions and any other assumptions you've got hidden in your brain and ask yourself, is that assumption really true anymore? Because certainly COVID has shown us in many ways that they aren't. So what's the first one here? And this came out of the digital research earlier. Our customers really value the human touch. We learned in our digital research that people want personal service. They don't necessarily need that from a person. And what's happened in digital in many ways with what we can do with the customer experience in the digital world, they're just as happy to get that help from a computer or from an app or from a website, as long as it's personalized service. Now take COVID one more step, really value the human touch. I don't want anybody near me when this is happening. And so it further devalued the human touch. And you see many of the transformations that have happened with restaurants and with teaching and others, where we're going to still give you that personal service. We're still going to deliver those products, but just in a lower touch way. Sorry, I'm having cursor problems here. Okay, next one. Regulators will never let us do that. If you ever want to stop an innovation in an organization, just say that. And you got a really good chance that it's going to stop the conversation cold. The thing is, your competitors may not be saying that. And you really, anytime anybody asks that, you should question it, because the regulators in many industries have gotten much more comfortable with innovation and much more comfortable with change in general. Now, you needed to go along with them. You don't want to just spring it on them later. But certainly in the digital world, we were seeing that in many ways. But once we came along in the COVID world, we start seeing things, for example, like distance medicine. There was a real question about the privacy regulation there. And as the doctors went to distance medicine, there was a point to say, do the best you can, and then we'll figure out how to do this the absolute best that's possible. But there was a period of time when the regulators were like, go ahead, Go ahead, we need to do this, and we'll get there. And they're not going to come back and put people in jail if there were mistakes made, because they were all trying to do the right thing. FDA, approval for drugs, similar. Same thing with teaching. An elementary school classroom hour is not the same as it was before. Does that mean these kids are not going to graduate 5th grade because they didn't get as many hours in the classroom? Of course not, right? Even the SATs, not regulatory, but it used to be the currency to get into college. And even some schools are saying, we no longer need that. Some great schools are saying that because the world has changed. So the regulators will never let us do that? No, the regulators will often let you do that if you do it with them. Now, there are certain things the regulators will never let you do, but that's okay. I can wait and watch what others do. This idea of fast follower, yeah, that was an interesting thought, but in many ways, we need to be innovating ahead of our customers, innovating ahead of our competitors. And frankly, in the COVID world, if you waited and watched, you might have been 3 or 4 months out of business while other people were at least getting some business done. So you had to move and figure out whether that was right. Related to that, our IT unit can't keep up. In the digital world, there was a constant stream of conversation. I would hear it from executives all over the place. Digital is fast, but our IT unit is slow. So the only way we're going to make digital happen is by creating a separate unit. And what we found over and over in the digital world is that you can create that separate unit, but it needs to work really closely with IT, because so much of the knowledge about the legacy, so much of the knowledge of the way the company works is in your IT group. And it's hard to get away from that unless you're just putting one little thing on top of a separate thing on top. So the digital and the IT groups have to work very closely together, and the business and the technology groups need to work very closely together. That's the only way we've seen digital transformation work in companies. As COVID has gotten even more. Even in the places where IT was the most disrespected, they kind of saved the company by allowing remote work, by allowing a shift to a more hands-off kind of working going on. IT may not have the respect, but were really fundamental in helping companies get going quickly as COVID happened. And that's really worth thinking about. What are we doing to make IT not work well? Or what is IT doing to itself? And how can we leverage what's happened to do more in sync with those? So if these were on the digital side, these were already happening with digital, and they accelerated in COVID. I want to add some others that were more new for COVID. People won't pay full price for a digital version. When we first started teaching online, we thought we'd have to severely discount our prices because it's not the same as being in person. It's not a course, it's a digital course that's different. And what we're finding is that actually we did not have to do that. People see the value of the courses they get. And if we deliver a good course, whether it's digital or not, people are willing to pay for that. And in fact, one thing we're finding is that people are, if they get as much value out of the course, they don't have all the travel cost to get there. It may actually be better for them. They're willing to pay full price for that. And we see that also, certainly movies are coming out not cheaper anymore. You're paying full price for a ticket in many movies than you did before. In other places, there's a subscription version going in there, but you're still paying for those digital movies in ways that more than I thought we would. And once again, not that this assumption's wrong, but I think we want to question how wrong it is, or question how right it is to keep this assumption in place. Another one for the digital. If people aren't in the office, they're not productive. Hey, we're being plenty productive, and you've seen the research. People often are actually being more productive in this world. They're also more stressed, and their work-life balance is more difficult. But for many people, they're just as productive outside the office. Now, that's interesting. Now, some people are not, and we have to be able to separate, the wheat from the chaff in that situation. But this idea that if I can't see you, you're not productive, that assumption is not proving true in many cases. That leads to this other one. Important meetings are better in person. And you know exactly what I'm saying. Let's get on the phone. Let me get out there and do that sales call with you. Let me do that performance review with you. Let's do that interview with you. Let's do those conferences in person. It's always better in person. Even if I have to travel to Thailand for a conference, it's better to be there in person at that conference so we can have the right interactions. And we found, of course, over the last year or so that that's just not true. Sales calls work very well online, and they save an awful lot of trouble for the call, for getting there. Conferences, working really pretty well online. I miss having happy hour with my friends and catching up there, so I have to catch up with them in a different way. Some of that offline hallway conversation, we have to find a better way to happen. Something else that's happening very interestingly, though, about the meetings better in person, we're finding that in many cases, this is a way to improve inclusion in ways we couldn't before. So for example, medical schools, you bore the cost of going out for your medical school interviews. And some people could not do that, or they could do one where they couldn't do 6 or 7 or 8. Now you can do them in person. Everybody can do it, as opposed to just the people that could afford to take that trip. And so we're seeing more, there may be actually some benefits to allowing this to happen online rather than in person that we hadn't anticipated. And then there's one more pre-COVID assumption I just want to share with you. Video meetings are kind of fun. There is no way I'm having fun in these meetings anymore. I'm getting work done, right? So that one is absolutely, for me, absolutely no longer true. I don't know how you feel about it. But it was an assumption we had going in here. So as we think about this thing, I want you to ask yourself, how many of these assumptions did you have going in? And for how many of these assumptions have you found that they're not true and you needed to rethink the way your company worked because of these assumptions? For me, I listed them because I had to do a lot of rethinking on all of these things. And so that's why I have them in the 8. Be curious to think about how you think about this too. So we have a little poll. Why don't we try the poll? And we'll give you 5 of these things. And the poll is a simple question. We'll give you 5 assumptions. Which one where did the pandemic most cause your organization to rethink?
Okay, so I'll go in order as you listed them. Our customers really value the human touch, 27%.
Okay.
Regulators will never let us do that, 7%.
Okay.
I can wait and watch what others do, 7%.
Mm-hmm.
Important meetings are better in person, 45%. So very much the clear winner.
Okay.
And people won't pay full price for a digital version, 13%.
Okay, so this is very interesting. I expected to see these numbers be higher. And so that's how I started off with these assumptions, not that they were absolutely untrue, but that we really wanted to think about whether they're still true. And, certainly, for example, there are certain industries where the human touch will always matter, luxury, retail, some of those things. In some cases, your hotel experience, but in other places, it's not. And so seeing the 27, that's interesting. The important meetings, yeah, we've learned that, but I expected to see that would be a higher number. So I'm really interested to think about, why it's less than 50% of the group. And the other ones, it's interesting. Why don't we do this if we could? This is a set that we've thought through, as over the last couple of weeks as we've been thinking for this presentation. Here are 7 or 8 assumptions that need to be rethought from the pandemic time. If you have some others, can you put them into the question and answer section? Just suggest them in and put them in there through the Q&A as if you're asking a question. Paul's going to look through and find a couple of them that are interesting that are not on our list, and we can talk through them in a few minutes. So go into the Q&A section, go ahead and put some other assumptions, just like, we had these assumptions here. If you have another assumption you want to add and try out for the group, pop it in there and let's talk about it. Okay? So given these assumptions, the really critical piece of this is, okay, we get that things need to be different, and we might even have an idea how they should be different, but how the heck are we going to make that happen? And so what we did back in this digital transformation research, starting in 2010, we published a book on this that's here at the bottom, and also published an article called The 9 Elements of Digital Transformation in the Sloan Management Review. We sat back, about 5 years after it published, late 2019, we started thinking through, well, it's been 5 years. Moore's Law said things are changing really quickly. How have our recommendations and frameworks changed over those 5 years? And as we were thinking through that process, then COVID came along and led to even more rethinking and rechanging. So what I want to share with you for the rest of our time together is how digital transformation works going forward? What are the capabilities you need? Where are some opportunities to look? And what are some examples on how they've done that? Okay. So first up, the DNA of digital masters. I said to you, when you think about digital transformation, it's as much about transformation as it is about digital. It's as much about the leadership capability as it is about the technology. And we found this. We found in our first sets of interviews, we interviewed 151 executives in large companies about what they were doing with technology. And we found that many were doing a lot, very few were doing it well. And the ones that were doing it well, they did two capabilities better than others. They weren't just adopting the technology, they were also envisioning and driving change. They had the ability to drive transformation, not just to adopt the technology. Second of all, you see here on digital capability, this isn't about mobile or machine learning or Internet of Things. This is about changing the way you work with those technologies, with the exception of this last one, which is your technology platform. So what's changed over the last 5 years? Number one is that we realize that employees matter as much as customers in many cases. And number two, over here, culture was not really a thing that we were talking about much at the time. And now it's becoming much more common. In fact, I have an article in Sloan Management Review about how you can get the digital ready culture to be fast enough to compete in these worlds. So what happens, you get two capabilities, you get this two dimensions, and you want to be here in the digital master area. But of course we have the off diagonals, and the fashionistas, they're adopting a lot of shiny, glittery technology, but they're not really integrating it as well as they could. And as a result, they're driving revenue but they're doing it at a lower profit margin because things are not connected. They don't have that unified experience you should. You have a higher cost structure. Over here, the conservatives, they're being too careful. They're really trying to avoid wasting money. And so when they do things, they're well connected, but they're too risk averse. And as a result, they're not innovating. And as a result here, they have higher profit margins, but they're not driving as much revenue through their capacity. We're the masters. When we ran the numbers, 9% higher profit through their capacity, higher revenue through their capacity, 26% higher profit. And what's interesting, it's also how you lead. If you're leading for innovation only, you're going to get that innovation. You're going to be in this fashionista quadrant, but you're not necessarily going to get the profit margins. If you're leading to not waste money, you're not going to waste money, but you're not going to be able to innovate. And so the digital masters put it together, and they do that because you got digital and leadership capability, and they work together to try something and continue, try something and continue, and everything you do builds on what was there before. So we got a whole book on that. You can see there. And what I want to do is talk about what changed. Oh, if I can come back. What changed? I mentioned employee experience has come up as a new one. That was not in our original model. And culture here was not in our original model, but it's getting there. And in fact, as we looked through this, and we did some surveys also, we found that these leadership capability ideas, leadership is, we know how to do good leadership. We know how to build the capability to transform. There was not a lot of change there, except we were moving into building culture, not just driving projects. The bigger change happened here on the digital capability. And so we wrote a new article, came out last year, on the new elements of digital transformation that focuses a lot on this digital capability. And so what do we have here? Here are what I consider, where do you want to look for opportunities in digital? There are 4 areas you can look, and then they all, of course, you've got to be on top of the right IT and process platform. Let's start here with the customer experience. Customer experience has become more personal, more experienced, more emotionally attached than it ever was before. It's no longer just running the right advertisements and running the right promotions. This experience is becoming really essential in making the change happen. Number 2, operations. Operations are becoming more connected, more dynamic, more data informed than they ever have before. This employee experience has come up very, very importantly to be, as important as the customer experience is. And we had not been paying as much attention to that. And a business model, also we want to be innovating in that world. What I do want to say here is on the platform, it even more important now to make sure your technology and process platform is what it needs to be. And we're seeing that these are emerging into 3 three kinds of different platforms that are happening. One is your core platform, which is all the back-end systems, the ERPs, all those things that just make your company run. But often there's a different digital platform facing your customers. And data itself is also moving into the platform world, where data, because it's got value on its own and people need to pay more attention to data, it's starting to get its own value in this area. So we originally had 4 areas here. We had customer experience, operations, and business models. We didn't have employee experience. That has moved. And also these elements within have changed also. So let's go through each of these in turn. Customer experience, I mentioned to you, it's becoming much more emotionally engaged, much more personalized, much more experiential than it ever was before. This is, we were starting that with the original research, and it's just becoming more and more. You see what Starbucks has been doing. Stitch Fix, which was a neat idea a few years ago, has turned into a real business of personally curating clothes for you that you can work. And it's all data behind the scenes, right? More and more data on their thousands of customers, but also on how I relate to those thousands of customers so we can see what would be there. And many others, GiftGaff, really benefiting from the emotional engagement of their employees, of their customers, to provide service in ways they couldn't, in ways that they don't need employees to do that. Okay? So yes, it's about customer intelligence, but it's also about getting that experience right across all channels, and more about building that emotional engagement, which we can do more and more in digital than we ever could before. Next up is the employee experience. Like I said, this is something that has just risen to the fore in a big way. And many examples here, but certainly augmenting the employee. We were talking about replacement, but augmentation has become very important with decision support and machine learning to help that out, with new tools to help that out. But also there's future ready, right? We're doing some really interesting work on how learning and development needs to change in organizations to be much more agile in the moment and more about capability development rather than delivering shingles of courses like they used to do. We call that the Transformer Chief Learning Officer. And more we're getting into this flex forcing. It's not the gig workforce is not just the gig workforce. So you got several companies now that, especially consulting firms, are using their alumni as a gig workforce because they already understand how the companies work in there. I want to show you my favorite example, one of my favorite examples from all of this research. And that's, I got to go walk around an aircraft carrier under construction at Newport News Shipbuilding, and to talk about how they are enabling their workers, augmenting their workers in ways they never could before. You can imagine what the blueprints look like on an aircraft carrier. And it's such a problem that if you want to get up to a middle deck on the aircraft carrier to do work, it could be a 10-minute walk up 5 flights of stairs just to get to your workplace. So if you then need the blueprint, are you going to take that 10, 15-minute walk down, turn around and do another 10, 15-minute walk up to figure out what's behind that wall? Most likely not. You're just going to try to figure out what to do and save yourself that effort. And what they found is that the workers cannot envision themselves in a bigger problem. And it's hard if they have a question to get that question answered because everything is so far away. And what they did with the digital, once they were designing the ships digitally, they decided to turn that into a worker experience also. So for example, he needs to hang a bracket on that wall. He's going to need to cut some holes and do some welding. Where do you think he should do it? Should he do it right on top of that electrical box, which is on the other side of the wall, or will be on the other side of the wall? Or maybe it's better to put it on this area here. That's where you want to hang that thing. So not up there, but right down here where it's green. And so it's harder to make a mistake, or they make it easier to not make a mistake. When you're running wires along, you can imagine it might take 3 or 4 shifts to run a set of a couple dozen wires from one end to another of the ship. And there's always handoffs there. Well, now the handoffs, the computer, the screen tells you where to direct each wire, and you tell it where you left off, and the next person picks those wires up. They know exactly where it is. The handoffs are not a problem. And what's one thing is those wires get connected right. But number 2, if I'm the first out of 4 or 5 shifts of work that's going to be touching those wires, somebody's going to mess it up on down the line. Why should I bother to do a good job? Well, now that all the way through, nobody messes it up, I've got a lot more motivation to put quality into my work. And so they're seeing that people understand their role, they see themselves in it, and they're doing better quality in there. But what else? Certainly safety. If I want to pick up a box and it's red, I don't pick it up. I got to get help. Which one of these needs to be fixed? Is it which one's number one? Is it this one or is it that one? Right? You can tell very quickly on here which one. So for safety, it's better. It's harder to make a mistake. It's harder to do something dangerous. Doing our work, we can see ourselves better than we can on a blueprint. Maintenance, we know exactly when there's a problem, we can report it, somebody can take care of it. And for training, it's just been a remarkable opportunity to use augmented reality to train people, to bring them up speed faster. This is augmentation. These workers are not working harder, they're working better. And as a result, the companies are working better. They're also finding people are coming to work more often because they see themselves in the job. They have more sense of camaraderie and quality in what they're doing. And so it's been not only good for quality, but also for worker satisfaction. So that's what I mean by augmentation. You can use technology in many ways to help workers have a better job, not just be working faster or more, or not just be putting pressure on them or replacing them. So operations is the next one. Certainly the dynamic nature, what's happened with Internet of Things, Industry 4.0 has really started to take hold in a lot of operations. We are getting things like digital twins and machine learning are also really helping in those processes, the connected and dynamic nature. But what else is going on? We have better data to make decisions when the computers can't make those decisions. And that's incredibly important too. But I want to add one more thing. In the media, we rarely hear about the operational improvements that are happening in companies. And one reason for that is they don't always talk about them. But second, it's not something you can see as a customer, but it's tremendously useful. And so, for example, yes, as these things are happening in your plants or as they're happening in your financial services processes or whatever, they are becoming more efficient, they're becoming higher quality, they're becoming more adaptive. But what else can we do in that situation? Well, for example, Flextronics is one of the world's best at making sure they can manufacture electronic equipment. But they know so much about what components work together and what suppliers are best that now they can move up to help you design that product better, not just take your design and try to build it. Here, Singapore's DBS Bank got so good and so efficient at delivering customer service in high-cost Singapore that they were able to take their simplest, lowest touch processes and move them to India and make even your average Indian customer who doesn't have nearly the money that the average Singaporean customer does, that customer can become profitable because they're just so efficient in what they're doing at Digibank. So operations open up an entirely new opportunity in a lower wealth country than before. Raytheon, for example, they not only can tell how that drill bit is going to get in there, but they can actually tell at the micron kind of level through simulation where the little jumps and skips going to be on there. And maybe we need to speed up and slow down the machine tool in the design process so even the first prototype comes up better. And they don't need to be fixing errors later. They can adjust the speed of that device through simulation so it gets produced right the first time without any touch-ups. Over and over again, operations leads to new ways of working, including Asian Paints. Asian Paints got good enough that they have now become the Uber of home painting. They just don't sell you paint in India, they'll paint your wall. And these all emerged out of operations. It wasn't just the operations, it was opportunities that arose for the smart companies that could get there. Then there's business model transformation. Listen, we all think, and certainly a lot of academics and media people have helped people think, that the only thing worth doing in digital print business model transformation is to become that digital orchestrator of your industry. I think academics and media did a real disservice to the world on that because there's not a lot of room for the digital orchestrators in any industry. And if you try it, it's likely you're going to fail because most people fail when they're trying it. So you can try to get it out, but we shouldn't consider it to be failure if you're not the Uber or the Airbnb or the Amazon or the iTunes of your industry. Certainly people like Klockner Company are doing it. in their, very, very B2B industry, they've launched something and they're trying it and it seems to be working pretty well. But there are a tremendous number of opportunities that are not that. And so the way I want to think about it is, instead of swinging for home runs every time and striking out a lot, why not look at the singles and doubles? Or if you're a cricket person, I guess it's instead of going for the sixes, go for something a little smaller, right? And there are huge opportunities just in digital enhancements and information-based extensions. What do I mean by that? Well, Hilti, the tool manufacturer, now will rent them, or they'll provide you a service where you pay the monthly bill and the tools you need are just there. That's a different kind of thing than buying the tool and using it. Certainly Flow and Progressive Insurance and many other car companies now are able to monitor you as you drive. And so they don't have to guess whether your driving record is a true measure of what you are. They'll just watch you drive with that little snapshot device, or now with apps. And they know how fast you're accelerating. They know when you take a corner, do you do it on 2 wheels or 4 wheels? And they can rate your insurance better because they can gather that information in ways you couldn't before. And as we think about, service extensions, Michelin with its truck fleet service for cars, Daimler with its trucks that it sells. Now, Daimler, for example, when the check engine light went on, they could then call you and tell you what was wrong with your truck while you were driving it. Well, now that's becoming fleet service to keep the fleets maintained before they break. So these are information-based extensions that any company can do. So yes, you can try to become the orchestrator of your business. It's hard, it's risky, but don't wait for that, and don't assume that's the only answer. You have many wonderful opportunities here that are not that, and they're lower hanging fruit. They're really worth going after. So I've been through now very quickly. We want to rethink some of the assumptions we had and figure out whether they're still true, and many of them are not. Number one. Number two, in the digital transformation research, is as much about leadership as it is about capability, as it is about digital. And we want to make sure that we get both of those in there, because in the end, we need to drive change with this technology, not just adopt it. Or if the way we want to think it, rethink Westerman's law, that the business world, technology and COVID and other things are changing quickly, but organizations change much more slowly. We have the 2x2, right? It's more than a technology problem. It's really a leadership one. You need to have that vision and build the capability to transform over and over again. That's why culture is becoming so important, and why we have that article in Sloan Management Review on building a digital ready culture. But when I come back to this over and over again, when we thought about this as a technology problem, we were only halfway right or less. When we thought of it as a technology problem with leadership driving it from the top down, we were much more correct. And more over the last 5 years, and especially here in pandemic time, we found out that actually it's really more than anything else. People matter more than ever. And so our job as leaders is not just to do the investments. Our job as leaders is not just to bring the right technology in, but how can we excite our people? How can we enable them to make the changes, to do their work the best way they can do? How can we listen to them? Because on the ground, they know more than most of us do. And then how can we help them to do the impossible? That's how you win in digital transformation. It always has been. It's even more important now after the pandemic and during the pandemic to continue to do that. Leaders don't do anything in organizations. They get people to do them. And that's what you need to do as leaders again. If we're going to make digital transformation happen in the pandemic and after, it's going to be working through the people with some of the tools we've gotten. Energize them, listen to them, help them do the impossible. And that's how we're going to come out of this stronger than we ever were before. So I'll stop there. Do you have questions? I think first, Paul, have any interesting assumptions come through that we want to talk about?
Yeah, they certainly have, George. So I'll give you a second to pull up your camera. There you are. And let's start with those. We got quite a list of assumptions that folks in the audience wanted to bring up. Some are variations on assumptions that you posed. Some are variations on each other, and some are totally new. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through a list. You have a pen, you can take notes.
Okay.
And maybe you can cherry pick one or two that that you want to speak to. Why don't I begin by reading through the full list?
Sure.
Work cannot be done remotely. That's from Melody. Thank you. From
Okay.
Maria, closing deals takes longer remotely. From
Hmm.
Dawn, we don't have the funding to support digital transformation. We've heard that one before. From
Right.
Ryan, teams have to interact in person to build cohesion and effectiveness. From Jamie, there is a need to travel. From Pam, FaceTime
Need to
equals
travel.
productivity.
You just got, if you're not on an airplane, you just feel like you're not complete. I have a little bit of that. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Right on. Let's see, from Pam, FaceTime equals productivity.
Hmm.
I think that's a common organizational trait. From Cynthia, geographic proximity enables more effective collaboration and is therefore an important selection factor. From Rana, employees don't want to work from home. They won't like working from home. And from Tracy, work happens between 9 and 5. So you've got an interesting set there. Like I said, some are variations on your assumptions. Some certainly relate to each other, and then some I don't think have been a part of the conversation at all. So where do you want to start?
Wow, it's a really fascinating list, and I'm seeing two standpoints on this. So let me just say the first thing I'm seeing. One thing I'm seeing is people just saying, man, there were things that there's working with other people, there's working across boundaries that we want to rethink that. So, closing deals takes longer. Employees, geographic proximity matters. Certainly, Tom Allen, one of my favorite people ever at MIT, had the Allen curve, which says the farther away from you are from people, the less likely you're to see them, and the numbers are not big. If you're 30 meters away from somebody, you're like half as likely to see them. If you're 150 meters away, if you're 500 feet away, you just will never see them in the course of your day. And that means a different floor, a different campus building, or that kind of thing. So there's something about geographic proximity, and we certainly need to rethink that for the digital age. The really critical part is all the interstitial comments, all the running into the people in the bathroom or in the coffee machine has to be more intentional. And certainly in my world, I'm finding that I've got so many meetings, I don't always take that chance to just chat with people that I used to chat with, and I'm needing to be very intentional in finding that. So one thing I'm hearing here is this idea that, there's us and then there's them, and the only way we're going to make that work is if we spend time together.
Mhm.
And I think that's a little bit of what we have been talking about in terms of those assumptions, and that's important. Certainly the need to travel. I traveled too much, way too much. But I did find myself 3, 4 months in saying, man, I haven't left my house. I haven't seen anything other than my sidewalk for like a couple months. I really need to go somewhere. And so I don't know whether that's a work or a personal thing. Well, let me just say the other thing that I'm seeing in here, and it's really important for us to pay attention to as leaders. I'm seeing a little bit about this has made my world bad as a worker, that there are negative implications of this that we hadn't thought of. And where I was suggesting that these assumptions need to be about how we can be a better place by rethinking the assumption, I think some of these assumptions are saying we've rethought this assumption and we've made it worse for workers. And I'm especially seeing the one about work goes between 9 and 5. My guess is that that was not a comment that this is a good thing. That work now being 24/7 has actually been a bad thing for people, and certainly we've seen that more meetings, less combination between work and home, and we need to find a way to put those boundaries in better than we had before. So just quick
Really
wrap up. A lot of them were variations on a theme, which was good. This idea, though, that we need to also think about what we're doing to workers, not just how we're helping workers. That's an important comment we need to brace up.
Your last comment, right, about your assumption that the comment about work happening between 9 and 5 spoke to a problem, right? Spoke to a bleeding of work across time and dimension. And I read it differently. And I think this goes to I think an interesting tension that's emerging in organizations. I read that comment as the pre-COVID assumption was work happens between 9 to 5, and that's an overly regulated and stilted view that doesn't allow for flexibility in people's lives. And I think that speaks to like I said, a tension that's emerging as organizations are talking amongst leadership, amongst employees, and between about what work, where, when, and how work should happen, right? As we have opportunities to come together physically, right? And you've got many camps. You've got people, I think, we'll oversimplify. You've got extroverts who are desperate to get back and work right in close contact with other humans. You have introverts who have flourished during this time, and then you have people who are looking for some kind of hybrid model. And I think you have employees who feel empowered in ways that they had not before the pandemic to have a say in where, when, and how work gets done. It's a really interesting and complex management challenge.
That's really interesting. So Paul, what I think I hear you saying is not only do we individually need to rethink these assumptions, but we really ought to surface them and have discussions with everybody to figure out whether our assumptions on those assumptions are the same as they are.
I don't think it's avoidable. I think organizations are going to feel a mandate to do that.
Fascinating. Cool. Good. So thanks, by the way, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for putting those in it. I did not expect this large number of great assumptions, so thanks for sharing them.
And we have a slew of other questions. So maybe, George, we'll kind of do this lightning round style, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. Let's talk about regulation for a minute, since you brought that up. There's a big question about what regulators will allow or not allow going forward. Certainly, we were surprised, perhaps, by some flexibility across industries with respect to what rules were let fall to the wayside, or what kind of green flags were waved out of an assumption, or more than an assumption, out of the reality that certain rules simply could not. We're going to stop industry in its tracks. But then there's a question of whether or not we should be bracing for some kind of regulatory blowback as the platform stops burning. Yes, we turned a blind eye to that for a while, but bureaucracies are still bureaucracies, and bureaucracies need control. I mean, should we be bracing in some areas for a return with respect to regulation?
I don't think the regulators ever stopped regulating. I think they allowed a little slack to figure out how things were going to shake out in this situation. So I don't know that I'd call it a blowback, because I don't think it ever went away. One of the things that we'd want to think about doing, though, is how to help the regulators understand the right way to do things, how to show the examples where it's working well. Because if we don't do that, then the regulators are going to listen to the people that are paid to talk to them, and we're going to get interests guiding it rather than good examples. So if you've done some great stuff, make sure it gets out there in the public, make sure it gets to the regulators, so that your good stuff that's the way you want to do it is out there, and maybe somebody will pick it up.
Great. So a number of questions around Westerman's law. Are organizations changing more quickly if you watch over time, over decades? In other words, yes, technology moves faster than organizations, but maybe technology is moving so much faster, maybe organizations are as well. And whether they are or not, are there underlying institutional issues we can deal with to help organizations change more quickly?
Certainly the clock speed of industry has changed even in my career, right? Starting my career in the 80s and moving to now, bringing in computers just changed the way we communicate, right? The memo cart that used to roll by twice a day, and that kind of told us what the bosses were thinking, is now emails that come out whenever they need to. And certainly also the speed, growing up in the IT world, in many cases, the digital world, and also spent some time in IT, systems aren't developed in 3 years anymore. They're developed many times in 3 days or 3 months. That clock speed has increased. The question is whether your culture has you at the leading edge of that speed, or whether at the trailing end of that speed. If the clock speed is going, are you the trailer or ahead? And that's where culture comes in. And so that's why we did this research we published a little while back on how you build a digital ready culture in companies. People were saying to me, it would be great if we had the culture of Amazon. It'd be great if we had the culture of Uber and Apple, and Netflix. And the question is, though, can you run the HR practices? Can you hire and fire and promote and the way that they could? Can you share information as transparently as they could? And in many companies, you can't do that. So this research we did on the digital culture, which Paul will be happy to send you a link to if you want to see it, is how you can get digital enough. How you can be faster than you ever were before, but still live within the kinds of rules you have to live in the geographies you have to live in, without having to blow it all up over again.
So on that point, we had some questions about kind of assessing an organization's readiness for digital transformation. How do you I think we understand what our aspiration is because you've stated it very clearly. How do we know where we are?
So if you want, I can send you just a 20-question quickie thing from the back of our book. If you send me an email at georgew@mit.edu, I'll be happy to send you the quickie 20 question. And of course, then there's also the 120 question kind of thing that people we can or other people can do for you. That's on those two capabilities, the digital and the leadership. I think also we want to start thinking through the culture side. And there, send me an email. We can talk about a little bit more how you do those assessments, how you get your culture digital ready rather than in the older way of working things. Dinosaur ready, I guess we would call it.
Let's talk about leadership. So you have.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Paul.
As with culture, you have given us a model, right, for what leaders need to be able to do in digital transformation. I wonder if we might go a little bit deeper down. Are there new skills, traits, capabilities, kind of at a personal level, that have emerged as more critical, say, over the past year and a half or so, with respect to leaders? That's part one. I'll stop there and then I have a follow-up.
Okay. So certainly, one of the really important things of leaderships is empathy. Right? If you were not practicing very strong empathy before, we need to do it even more. You see, even in my assumption and Paul's assumption on that one assumption, right? The right answer is to figure out what your people are thinking. And that empathy is not only understanding where people are coming from, but helping them to understand how to feel part of this process. So number one is empathy. Number two is just a discomfort with the status quo. COVID created a burning platform for us, but why did we need that burning platform? Why couldn't we have been pushing the envelope anyway? And I think leaders need to do that more. This constantly rethinking, okay, we did that. What else can we do? What else can we do? So one is empathy. One is kind of a dissatisfaction, a constant questioning the status quo. And number three is just these agile practices in organizations. The organization needs to get better at experimenting, at failing fast, at learning in increments as opposed to in big chunks. So I'd say from a leadership angle, it's those three: empathy, constant questioning the status quo, this critical thinking, and the last is just the agile experimentation that we weren't doing before.
So my follow-up is kind of thinking more broadly outside of the last 18 months and that very special experience we've all had. How do you describe the level of data literacy as a requirement for business leaders?
There are a lot of companies out there now talking about digital literacy for their companies. I think for their people, I think that's a really good idea. Figure out who needs this digital literacy and get it there. One company I talked to just on Friday said, okay, anybody in the offices, we're going to get them digital literacy. The people that are doing our delivery trucks, we probably won't teach them because they're not going to be innovating a lot, right? So be clear who needs that. I think not everybody needs to be an AI guru. Not everybody needs to know how to program, computers, but everybody needs to be more comfortable using computers, and everybody needs to be more comfortable with data. I was in a manufacturing plant a little while back, and I saw they had the charts up, the new charts out of their new systems said, here's how we're doing every day on the wall, and it'd show when they were under, when they were over, that kind of thing. And I asked one of the employees, and most people got what it was about. I asked one of the employees about it. He said, I was never good at math. That looks like math. That's just not relevant to me. And so, the idea that we need to help people understand how to read a graph and why it's important, that person should be more comfortable with that kind of thing. Long answer there, Paul. Everybody needs to be more comfortable data. Not everybody needs to be a programmer.
Yeah.
But the idea of moving from intuition to data is important, and we should help people get there.
I have a question from the audience about travel, a topic that's clearly important to you. How do you see reduced travel as impacting innovation? And I think what the audience member is asking about is the risk of our implicit assumptions that we have due to the localized world we live in kind of closing in on itself if we're not out there seeing across the horizon.
I think that's really important. The question is whether I need to be seeing that or whether my people need to be seeing that. And so we've understood now the value of diversity for getting those different opinions in. And so can we, for example, if I need to figure out what's happening in Thailand, can I ask my people in Thailand to help me figure that out rather than me having to go there? You know, there's always going to be a balance, but let's harness the ideas rather than having one decision maker try to make this for themselves.
And a question about the digitization of customer service, something you mentioned early on. Do you think customers believe that they can get personalized service through digital tools that's on a par as with traditional human customer service?
I think for the routine work, customers are more and more believing that. I was shocked actually when my wife told me I could actually call Amazon to resolve a problem, because Amazon just works. I said, you know, am I going to have to be like every other company and wait for 5 hours while they say it's an especially busy time right now, when that's not really true, right? She said, no, they'll answer in a couple minutes, and they did. But I never had to do that in my first 10 years dealing with Amazon. So I think for the routine work, people are starting to expect it, and they're starting to demand it, and it's happening. I think when something breaks, that's when you still need a person. Mm-hmm. And you know, that may be for a while.
Great. And so I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. We've talked a great deal, not just today, but over the past 12 months or so, about how much the world has changed, because it has a lot, and it's the easy thing to focus on. What hasn't changed?
What hasn't changed is the essential role of employees in doing the work. You know, as a leader, you have to get the employees to do the work. You can't do it all. That has not changed. And what has changed is we're paying attention to it more. What has not changed is customers really want to get personal service. They want to see value for the money they're getting. What has changed is how we might be delivering that value. So this idea of understanding where they're being customer obsessed, this idea now and more of being employee obsessed, they're eternals that keep changing.
George, that's a great final word for a terrific session. That concludes our program. Thank you for attending. Thank you, George Westerman, and thank you to our sponsor, Compunal Digital.